Hey everybody, welcome back to another edition of Sports Speak, episode 58. Summer's here. We're really excited to bring you some more content here throughout the summer. I'm Eddie Kalegi.
And I'm Tim Moore.
Lots to get to on today's edition. We'll be joined by Zoe Alter in just a few minutes to talk about a lot that's going on in the MLB, including the recent spider tack and other sort of foreign substances stuff with Tyler Glasnow getting hurt. A lot to talk about there, as well as the NFL, including the continued saga with Aaron Rodgers if his days with the Green Bay Packers are officially done. But the NBA takes center stage, and we really have to start with that Philadelphia 76ers game. And I have said it on this show multiple times before that Doc Rivers is a great coach, but he is a terrible coach in the postseason. And we saw it yet again last night. You can't blame it completely on him. The Sixers as a team completely fell apart, could not make any shots. They made one field goal in the last 6 minutes. In the entire final 18 minutes of the game, Joel Embiid and Seth Curry were the only two players to make a shot for Philadelphia. Ben Simmons continued to prove why he is overrated, completely flat-footed, could not make any shots, was too afraid to really take any shots, which of course has always been a concern with him. And Tobias Harris, who had a couple of masterful performances already in the postseason, including in that Washington series, really faltered. But the Atlanta Hawks, an unsung team, Trae Young gets a lot of criticism. People compare him to the Goomba from Mario, but guess what? He's got a 3-2 lead for his Hawks against the number one seed in the Eastern Conference. And like it or not, with his playing style, he's scoring, he's making shots, he's making plays. There's a nice young supporting cast there in Atlanta with Bogdanovich and John Collins, and they're really proving how strong they can be. And like we said on the last show last week, this is a year in the NBA where you really don't know what's going to happen. Unlike most years where there's some sort of certainty when it gets down to the championship, you have 8 teams, well now 7 teams still eligible, who really, I think any of the 7 could feasibly win the championship. And you've never really thought about that before. And Atlanta continuing to prove that they are a really good, feel-good story.
Yeah, I mean, think about this. Going into the season, forget about the Hawks even being considered a team to, maybe go to the Eastern Conference Finals. But I really want to know what was the betting odds of necessarily both the Suns potentially as well as the Hawks being in the NBA Finals together. Because I think that'd be something relatively interesting, just as we saw last year, for example, with the Miami Heat being necessarily the miracle story. But touching on the Philadelphia subject, including Doc Rivers, Eddie, I 100% agree in this regard. You cannot have a collapse like the Philadelphia 76ers had in this pivotal game 5. And the fact of the matter is this: it's not the fact that they missed shots and that things fell apart in that last quarter that was the deciding factor. They made mental error after mental error after mental error. You mentioned the Ben Simmons instances where he was so hesitant to shoot. That's just a simple display of a mental mistake. The fact that you don't have confidence and you're overthinking and not playing basketball is necessarily the problem, which goes back to the point of this of what we're seeing throughout this entire series. Think about the other 2 losses at this point the 76ers have faced. If you really think about it, they lost those games on mental errors as well as dry spells as a result of them, which makes me really think and question again. And we knew the Eastern Conference going into this year, with the exception of the Nets, who we thought initially were the high favorite considering the stacked roster depth they had after acquiring James Harden and so on. But we thought maybe the Sixers or the Bucks were the next best team in terms of consistency, yet neither team in the East, and really any team at all, has been consistent. The only team that's been consistent, to be honest, throughout this entirety of the playoffs has been the Phoenix Suns, and that's relatively it. So the fact of the matter is this: everyone thought the 76ers were going to be the team that's going to win the Eastern Conference. They're going to work their way potentially to finally getting, Sixers fans the NBA championship that they've been desiring for years upon years that they didn't get back with AI. And the fact of the matter is this: you have the talent on this team. It's no longer the question. It's been no longer the process. That era came and went. And for example, like with the Brooklyn Nets, it's win now or you're done. And the fact of the matter is this, if you're still having mental mistakes, and we'll talk about the Utah Jazz as well in a little bit, you want to talk about mental mistakes, but you cannot be affording to have mental mistakes in a series like this. And yet it continues to happen over and over again for the 76ers, which really makes me want to believe, Eddie, that they're going to lose this upcoming game and we're going to see the Hawks end up advancing just from the simple fact that the Hawks, and especially granted, they played the Knicks in the first series that was a team relatively filled with inexperience. Of course, the Hawks do have a bunch of players that aren't as experienced, but obviously the situation's much different. You're going from a team that has a lot of expectations to fans that are just thankful their team's even in the playoffs of the New York Knicks. And the fact of the matter is the Hawks are an underdog, but they've been confident since they've stepped into the playoffs since day one, and they haven't lost that yet. Even with losses, they've been competitive. So the fact of the matter is this, is that when Philadelphia struggles, they're not a competitive basketball team. And if they're struggling, especially past halfway in a game 6, you can already tell their season's going to be done. And the fact of the matter is this, good basketball teams, even when they struggle, find ways to still be successful, even if it's not scoring. We haven't seen that at all in Philadelphia. When they struggle, they're even worse defensively. So I just don't know how they're going to last this upcoming game. And listen, hey, if this series goes 7 games, that's all fine and dandy. But I just don't see it right now for the 76ers.
And I've always thought this 76ers team that they've pieced together really isn't meant for this era of basketball. Having a lockdown starting center, having a tall point guard that's more of a passer and a distributor and one that'll charge the basket than a shooter. We're in the era where point guards like Curry and Lillard and Westbrook are all expected to take deep shots. And of course, Ben Simmons has only attempted 2 3-pointers in a regulation game in his entire career. So, like, it's the difficult thing to consider here, but like with the 76ers, I feel like they're a really good basketball team still. And credit to Doc Rivers. He is a good coach. He tries to keep, there's a lot of potentially combustible heads there in Philadelphia with that roster, but he's kept them somewhat under wraps, but we're continuing to see his failures in the playoffs, just like we saw last year with him at the helm of the Clippers. And then, of course, the shooting was just dreadful last night. But Atlanta, don't count them out. You never know. I mean, they could be matching up if they move on against the Nets or the Bucks. Of course, the Nets, so much uncertainty when it comes to injuries. With the Bucks, it's really about stopping Giannis Antetokounmpo. And you have 2 really great post defenders in John Collins and Clint Capella on that Hawks roster who could potentially match up really well with Giannis. But 2 more things with the NBA. Let's talk a little about this upcoming Nets-Bucks Game 6 matchup. Of course, Game 5, no Kyrie, Harden on a hobbled leg. Kevin Durant, I feel, has completely proved the doubters wrong. So many people have criticized him, of course, for his move to the Golden State Warriors, joining that super team, not being able to get over the helm in Oklahoma City when he just had Russell Westbrook. But with no Kyrie, with a banged-up Harden, with Joe Harris struggling mightily, Bruce Brown having a bad game, it was basically him, Blake Griffin, and Jeff Green, and they were able to power past Giannis, Middleton, and a healthy Bucks roster who had taken all the momentum in the series and take back a 3-2 lead. Do you think the Nets can close it out tonight? And do you think Kevin Durant has finally silenced those critics?
Well, I think Kevin Durant, first off, silenced those critics years ago. Listen, Kevin Durant, and there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it, in my opinion, Eddie. When he's healthy, he's the second best player in the NBA behind LeBron James. And I know Kevin Durant doesn't necessarily want to hear that because he wants to prove that he's better than LeBron James. But the simple fact of the matter is that, you know, Kevin, yes, he is a phenomenal athlete like LeBron is in terms of height, you know, a unique phenomenon. But LeBron James can play every position. I'm not saying Kevin Durant can't, but Kevin Durant, for the most part, is traditionally a forward, and that's really it. LeBron's worked his way around the entire floor in terms of position-wise while playing basketball. But the fact of the matter is this. There's nothing to critique about Kevin Durant, in my opinion. I mean, a triple-double. The man played out of his mind to keep Brooklyn right now alive in terms of what could be potentially going to the Eastern Conference Finals. And the fact of the matter is this, and you mentioned it's kind of the same thing for the Milwaukee Bucks, and I'll compare it as well. I've already mentioned Utah prior. I'll compare it to Utah. You could shut down Giannis, you're going to be good. You're going to have a great day. We saw the Clippers, for example, shut down Donovan Mitchell yesterday for the most part, and they found ways to be successful and take the 3-2 series lead. And, of course, Nets finding ways, again, to try to slow down Giannis. And the fact of the matter is this, okay? You're not going to stop Giannis. You just can't stop Giannis. He's going to score. But you have to slow him down. You have to make his impact a little bit more minimal. If he scores 30 in a game, that's okay, actually. That's considered well, considering the fact that you know he's going to be the driving force. And the fact of the matter is, in that last matchup, the Nets accomplished that. Granted, with the lack of depth, they found ways to accomplish that. And I think that you have a little bit more hope. Obviously, you don't have hope in terms of the health end because the Nets from start to end this year has not been consistent in health ever so much since even when they got Harden. Everyone's been in and out of this lineup. But think about it like this. And I know two different sports, but they almost kind of, well, I don't want to say it, but they kind of remind me of the New York Yankees right now. You take a bunch of guys together, and not this year's New York Yankees, but you get the point. They look like the New York Yankees in regards to the fact that it doesn't matter who's on the floor. They're going to find ways to craft a team and be successful. And yes, granted, they have their superstars carrying the weight. But this team is good enough. This team has been from the get-go good enough to make the NBA Finals. It's win or go home. It's just simply, it's that simple put for Brooklyn. This could be your last year to win a championship, ever. This could be your last year with this group because everyone is an opt-out at the end of this year. I say they get it done. They seal the deal in this next game against Giannis, and it's another going back to the drawing board for Milwaukee, which, for the record, that team's not much different from last year. So for them to go out this year, essentially, right here in the semifinals, kind of makes sense because that's where the team's been year after year after year. Again, when you are essentially happy with the team you have and you don't make much change, complacency falls into place and you don't pursue further. The Nets were not complacent this year. Rather you like it or not, this team turned around, got one of the best shooters in the NBA. This team found ways to add depth throughout the year. If the Nets don't win the NBA championship this year, from another standpoint, outside of the fact that it's win or go home, it's a disappointment because this team had the most change going into this year, and we're seeing it on the floor. I mean, let's not forget this factor. How bad was that defense to open up this year? We thought this team could have went maybe 7 games in an opening series if they had the same team they had from the opening game to open up this year. But yet they've gotten better. They stepped up to the occasion. They've played great defense against Milwaukee. So there's no doubt in my mind they're going to close out and they're going to win this next game against Milwaukee to move to the Eastern Conference Finals.
And I will disagree with you. I do think the Bucks did actually make some changes. They did bring in Drew Holiday. They did add some depth, but I think this is really starting to wear on both Giannis Antetokounmpo and Mike Budenholzer's legacies because this has been, 4 years now where the Bucks have been considered one of the top teams in the Eastern Conference. Of course, back-to-back seasons before this, they had the best regular season record in the NBA, and Giannis wins the MVP, yet they can't go very far in the postseason. And this is a year where you really have to take advantage. A down year for Miami. Boston, of course, in a retooling time. I mean, this is your chance in a weaker Eastern Conference. And with the Nets suffering these injuries, when Kyrie Irving turned his ankle, that should have been the opportunity when you realize, oh man, we could actually win this. And the Bucks took the offensive in Game 4, but let off in Game 5 and could not contain KD. And that's why I think the Nets will get it done. Last NBA thing, you mentioned the Utah Jazz, and they're another team, a top seed, struggling right now here against the LA Clippers. Now, of course, you have talked about multiple times on this show how you don't really see the Jazz really as a championship contender from the beginning, and we're surprised they even ended up with this number 1 seed and got through the first round against Memphis as easily as they did, especially with Donovan Mitchell's injuries. But Donovan Mitchell did not play a great game. Rudy Gobert did his best defensively, did not do great offensively. And this was a time for you to capitalize here against the Clippers. The Clippers, remember, have never in their team history made it past the second round of the playoffs. And they lost Kawhi Leonard potentially for the remainder of the postseason. And Paul George, of course, has not been clutch really ever in a postseason game before, even going back to his days with the Indiana Pacers. And they just let him completely dominate. And that's pretty concerning. And let's also remember the Clippers coach, I already harped on this in the last episode, but Tyronn Lue, I still think is one of the weakest coaches in the NBA. And I still think that was a terrible decision for the Clippers to bring him in. And we saw some of his strange rotations, which potentially cost the Clippers both of those games and why the series is at 3-2 instead of already done in the Clippers' hands. That being said, Paul George also sort of silencing the doubters, and really strong performance for him, but for Utah, really disappointing. And I think this series will go to a game 7, but I have a feeling the Clippers might pull this out.
You know what? I would like to say the Clippers are going to pull this out, Eddie, but at the same time, I think this is a wake-up call for Utah. You lose 3 consecutive games. Your backs are against the wall. And might I add, the way the NBA works their playoffs, of course, games 1 and 2, you play at home. Games 3 and 4, you're on the road. You're back home game 5, where, of course, Utah lost. And now you're going to be going back to LA for game 6 before, essentially, if we do go to game 7, it's back in Utah. And the fact of the matter is this, Donovan Mitchell, this was the worst career game, statistically speaking, he's played in terms of the NBA playoffs. Now, think about that for a second. Someone who typically in their career is averaging above 27 points a game, has multiple, in fact, over half of his career double-doubles have come in the NBA playoffs, has one off game in regards to the fact that he was, maybe 20 points, 21 points. And that's considered a low standard for Donovan Mitchell. Now, I understand he was inconsistent. He's not shooting well. But it goes back to the same point about this, for example, about the Milwaukee Bucks that I just mentioned prior. You cannot stop Donovan Mitchell, but you can slow him down. And we know the fact that Utah is going to rely on him as the primary shooter. But the fact of the matter is this, and again, this is my problem with it for Utah year in and year out. Joe Ingles is as inconsistent as it comes. Granted, he had a career year this year. He has never come up clutch when it matters. Sure, he's had some big games, but when you need him to come out and produce 20 points off the bench, you're lucky if you get 5. And then some days he has it when you don't have expectations of him. Granted, okay, first off day for Clarkson as well, which is not very typical, but everyone knows that that's the number 2 option, granted, coming off the bench for Utah, shooting-wise. And the Clippers were all over it. Rudy Gobert is another one. Offensively speaking, we know he's arguably the greatest defensive player the NBA has right now. And, of course, Defensive Player of the Year yet again. But he is very inconsistent, granting his height advantage, in getting boards and getting putbacks and so on. And you can't have that right now if you're Utah. Because if you only have one offensive option, and this has been, again, this is the reason why I didn't see this team being a 1 seed and having success. You have one shooting option. Teams that win NBA championships, and again, I'll look at the Phoenix Suns right now, because I will go and jump to this conclusion. The Phoenix Suns are your NBA champions this year with the way they're playing. It's not one option on that team. You have 4 or 5 players producing. Your best player has the off day, or has an off day. Who's stepping up for Utah? There's no one. There's no one stepping up for Utah. It's Donovan Mitchell or go home. If he doesn't score 40, Utah's in trouble. So the fact of the matter is this. I think they have a wake-up call for Game 6, and Game 7 is going to come down to the wire. I think Utah barely edges it out, but I have the Suns sweeping them next series, Eddie, and it's going to be a brutal, brutal wake-up call for Utah because, yes, I understand it's a small market team. But you cannot be having as much success in the NBA when you rely on one player on a consistent basis.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you there. Donovan Mitchell, I mean, he's a one-in-a-kind talent, but you can't – the NBA, you need a supporting cast. We talked about this in the last show. That's why we've seen teams like Atlanta and Phoenix find success this postseason. But a lot more in the NBA playoffs. We'll talk about it more next week. But let's get into our interview now with Zoe Alter, where we'll be talking baseball and football. Well, we're continuing here on Sports Speak. Eddie Kalegi with Tim Moore. We're joined now by Zoe Alter once again. Thanks for being here.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
So let's start in the MLB world, where, of course, there's been a lot of drama coming around with the spider tack, sunscreen, foreign substances, all of that nature. And, of course, Tyler Glasnow has suddenly stolen the scene. Glasnow, a pitcher for the Tampa Bay Rays, has been one of the top pitchers in the American League this season, but ended up getting injured on Tuesday, and it's a UCL injury, which they're going to try to baby for now, but, of course, a UCL screams a potential Tommy John surgery, which could cause him to miss a year and a half, which would be really difficult for a pitcher who has so much promise at such a young age. But Glasnow, in an interview, was very expressive, saying that he thinks that the MLB recent crackdown on foreign substance usage led to his injury because he had to go, quote unquote, cold turkey when he usually puts sunscreen on his hands to grip the ball better. He had to change his fastball grip, was flexing his muscles too much when he was throwing. He explained it pretty well, but me and Tim have already talked about this a lot on the last show, and I still think there's an issue with the integrity of the game if the MLB just puts their hands up and lets these baseball players and pitchers just do what they want. So, Zoe, I kind of want your perspective on this situation, especially now with Glasnow's injury coming to light.
Okay, I feel like this is the issue. I feel like foreign substances like this have always been in baseball. Whether it's like, it's just anything like that has always been in baseball. I mean, there was even the whole issue with like pine tar Vaseline on people's hats. Like, there's always been something like this in baseball. And yes, now it's coming to light more than it used to be. And I do think the MLB should crack down on it more and should continue to. But then also there's the issue of will more pitchers get hurt and how many pitchers use it? Because if every single pitcher is using it, do you let it become a part of the game? Just because, obviously, if everyone's been using it for so long, is it going to change the game a significant amount if you take it out? And that's my worry. Because what if you combine this with, like, the juiced baseballs? Like, remember how last year all the baseballs were juiced and now they took them out and it's caused a whole shift? Like, the pitchers are getting better. So they made the balls easier, like, better to hit. But now you're taking away that, so now it's just a pitcher's game. So I think it depends, because you have to make certain changes if you're going to take this foreign substance out and fully crack down on it. But is there a way to prevent everyone from using it? Because people go out and wear sunscreen. I wear sunscreen every time I play, and I have sunscreen on my skin. How do you prevent? Do you say no sunscreen? Like, there are certain things. How are you going to prevent these foreign substances? So if it's not possible to, I think other rules need to be put into play to even it out. But for me personally, I mean, we know the management of the MLB and how they're all over the place and they don't really get anything done. So I'm just worried that it's going to like turn baseball really badly because of how they're trying to do this. Also, pitchers aren't going to be happy about it. Pitchers are being watched. They're being randomly checked. They know they can't use it anymore. And obviously there's tension. There must have been enough tension for him to come out and say this stuff. I mean, this kind of puts his career on the line a little bit.
Yeah, and I feel like you kind of alluded to it. I feel like we should sort of address this on a case-by-case basis because there are certain substances that are being used. Of course, pine tar has always been a big thing when it comes to hitters, and that's something that's just explicitly simply used to try to get a better grip of the bat and do better at the plate. Something like sunscreen, that's not simply used to become a better pitcher or a better hitter. You have to kind of distinguish between those two. For example, another thing, of course, there's been these like spider tack, which Tyler Glasnow alluded to in his interview that he's never used because that's trying to get spin rate on the ball. That's trying to make you better. Sunscreen is simply trying to make you more comfortable. Maybe it helps your grip a little bit, but that's something that you can't really crack down on because so many people use it. And, you know, someone as white as me, I know using sunscreen can be pretty beneficial in other ways too. But yeah, so I kind of feel like the MLB kind of has to be a little more explicit. It was a little difficult for them to, you know, rush into this in the middle of a season and roll out these new guidelines, but I don't know. It's a tough thing to consider. Tim, what are your feelings on this?
Yeah, you know, I was thinking about this. Zoe brings up a relatively strong point in regards to the fact that, well, you know, there's a little bit of a bottom line open. And what I mean by that is, for example, and Eddie, you just mentioned pine tar, for example. Well, think about it like this in terms of how open baseball's rules are. A hitter can utilize pine tar up to a certain distance on their baseball bat, but then it's also legal for a pitcher to utilize pine tar. So thus, pine tar is considered illegal in the sport of baseball, but it's allowed to be utilized for hitters, for grip. but not for pitchers. So to me, it's like, and that's just one example, but in terms of other examples such as sunscreen and so on, it's the fact of the matter that it's been around the game forever. And I thought about it earlier today like this, and why can't the MLB just simply approach it? I don't know if you guys saw yesterday. I know, of course, you guys not being Yankees fans, but Garrett Cole, after yesterday's start, blasted to the media after we know about that big interview, his prior outing about, have you ever used spider tag and so on, and he couldn't really necessarily answer. He kind of told the MLB that they need to start working with players because he could not grip the baseball yesterday. And it's outrageous that pitchers can't use anything. And going back to the Tyler Glasnow point, he has a very valid point, actually, to why they've injured him. Now, for folks that have never seen a Major League Baseball in terms of maybe holding one in their hand, that is, not, of course, on TV, but the seams relatively in a Major League Baseball are very relatively thin compared to, maybe playing Little League Baseball or high school baseball where the seams are thicker. Typically, the thicker the seams you have, the more easier it is to grip the ball, and thus really pitchers rely on throwing the ball, directly from the seams. To Garrett Cole's point is that if you have no substance, at least if it's sunscreen or rosin or something, you're gripping the skin part of the ball, not the seams, more to then try to provide spin, thus why it's a more stiffer grip. And Garrett Cole said, well, if Major League Baseball doesn't want me plunking guys with heads, I need some help here because these balls are as thin as it can be. Those balls, I'll tell you right now, especially if you catch a batting practice baseball, those balls are slippery. Those seams are not thick at all. Players are giving it their all, and I can understand throwing 100 miles an hour without grip is a problem. So for the way Major League Baseball should fix this is either one of two things. Either the fact that you crack down and you say, sorry, if there's injuries, and that's it. Or instead of telling players and, you keep on checking players and so on, why not, when a pitcher comes out, you allow them in front of an umpire to put a substance on in a designated location so that pitchers don't complain about grip while it's also legally. And if there's any other spot on a player's uniform or other place that's not the designated location from where their stuff, wherever that substance is, then that player's ejected and gone. That's the fair way of doing this at this point. Because I agree, and I see both sides. I agree 100%. Using things like spider tag is an absolute problem. It's meant to manipulate the game and give a player a competitive advantage. And I understand that. But don't penalize the guys that are just trying not to hit someone in the head. And that's going to be the problem. Not just pitchers with UCL injuries and so on, trying to grab pitchers, harder. Things such as curveballs, which, little kids are told all the time, oh, don't throw curveballs because you'll throw your arm out. To an extent, while that's not right, that myth, you have to grip your curveball harder because essentially you have to grip it harder now with these thinner seams. So I understand pitchers' points to that extent. So for Major League Baseball to jump to these conclusions, you have to find the common medium. And again, I'm not saying my way of fixing it is the best way of fixing it, but to me, that's a common medium. You could still check players to make sure they don't have any overly illegally substances on them. And on top of it, the pitchers are happy that they at least have a common medium to make sure that they have some sort of grip on the baseball. Because the fact of the matter is, it's not doing much when you have, catchers behind the plate with pine tar up and down their chest protector. That's not getting them all the grip to throw those pitches, nor is the rosin back behind. They need some sunscreen or some other things to help grip that baseball because we're seeing wild pitches, might I add, at an all-time rate. I don't know if anyone's noticed that, but we've seen a ton of wild pitches this year. I haven't checked the hit-by-pitch statistic, but I would imagine that's also relatively up, and especially over the last 2 weeks. And, of course, injuries have skyrocketed. That's an obvious. Tyler Glasnow's made that obvious. So MLB has to do something. Just telling everyone you can't use this, that's not the answer. You've got to work with the players, and that's the final answer.
That's always been the issue with the MLB, too, is that the management and people high up can't work with the players. And that's been an issue for so long. I mean, when they were having the shortened season last year, I know all of us as fans we didn't even know if the season was going to happen because the players and the people high up couldn't get to an agreement. And I think that's always been the issue. So if they can come together somehow, it's going to solve so many problems.
Yeah, I agree. And like what Tim was alluding to as well, I mean, it's so difficult to try to navigate this. And you can obviously argue from both sides because, like I was saying on our last show, Tim, you can't just let this happen because we've seen how baseball just 25 years ago had to go through a steroid epidemic where really you've ruined the integrity of the game for 10 years, have completely skewed the Hall of Fame, have completely skewed the history books, and it's really a dent on baseball's history. And you don't want this becoming a factor. But looking at some of the statistics from last night, if you're diving back into those stat books, it's pretty obvious that some of these pitchers just did not have the same control. The Astros hit 6 home runs last night. The Giants hit 6 home runs against Arizona. The Mets teed off on the Braves. There was many games that were very high scoring. A lot of pitchers were struggling with their command. You mentioned how Garrett Cole voiced his concern about not being able to grip the ball. Of course, everybody's seen what Tyler Glasnow had to say. It's becoming something that has to be addressed, but has to be addressed correctly. And it's one of the many topics that baseball really will have to discuss this year with the potential for a future lockout if a collective bargaining agreement can't be agreed upon. But looking back at the game, of course, the big story last night for the Mets, and as a Mets fan, Jacob deGrom is now hurt for the 4th time in 3 months this season. Of course, had a great start, 3 perfect innings, struck out 8 of 9, and also drove in a run. And his statistics are just crazy. He has more RBI than runs allowed this season. But another injury, this time it's his shoulder. So he's already injured his back, his side, his elbow, and now his shoulder. I know he's in his age 33 season, but Zoe, of course, you're a fellow Mets fan, and the Mets do have a depleted team. They are getting some of these players back, but of course, Syndergaard, Carrasco, both well behind schedule right now. Do you think it would be fair for the Mets, if this isn't serious, just to put DeGrom on the injured list, skip him a start or two, and let him come back when he's 100% healthy?
I think that's the only option. I don't think there's any point in rushing him back earlier because, first of all, he's your ace. Obviously, he's the ace in baseball. He's the best pitcher in baseball. I mean, you still get some of his stats. He's pitched, 64 innings, has over 100 strikeouts. He has like a .6 something ERA. He's ridiculous. He's also hitting over 400, as you said. He's absolutely insane. I mean, I think he's one of the candidates for MVP now, and you don't see pitchers win MVP a lot. You see them win the Cy Young. So I think that for his health and for the Mets' health, you have to sit him out because the Mets aren't going to go anywhere if they can't trust the rest of their team. DeGrom can't win you everything. He can do so much for you, but he only pitches once every 6 games. He's not going to win you the thing. And we've seen that with other teams who, I mean, you even saw it last year with Trevor Bauer. Like, he didn't pitch that much, don't get me wrong, but a team can't ride one pitcher to the World Series. It's not the way it goes. You need a whole rotation and everything. So if the Mets don't trust the other parts of their team, even if you're eventually getting guys like Syndergaard and Carrasco back, we have no idea when they're getting back. They're way behind schedule. Syndergaard, I mean, he's still coming off a Tommy John, so that's a huge thing. There's so many issues going on there. If you can't trust other people, there's no use in even using DeGrom because he only has so much time, right? He's just a normal guy. He only has so much time. Great baseball player, but a normal guy. And there's no point in rushing him back if you can't trust the rest of your team because the only reason I would ever say to play him is if you're in a situation where it's a must win or you're out. That's the only situation I would play him in. And for me, if the Mets don't believe that they're a World Series team, it's not a must win situation. Because if you can't rely on the rest of your team to get you places, DeGrom's not going to do anything for you. So that's where I'm at. Also, just because he's like my favorite player on the Mets, and I really don't want to see him get hurt. You see how demoralizing it is for a pitcher to get hurt. I mean, everyone's basically forgotten about Syndergaard. He was one of the, I mean, I used to love him and I still do, but the whole league's pretty much forgotten about him because since his Tommy John, that happens to so many guys. That's what we're just talking about Glasnow and like how we don't want him to get Tommy John because people forget about you. And it's not worth it for the Mets ace who they just re-signed for so much money, who decided to stay here in New York because he loves the Mets. It's not worth him to push him and get him hurt.
And honestly, I mean, the Mets are in such a comfortable position right now. They're 10 games over 500. They have a 5-game lead in the NL East. That's their biggest lead in divisional play this deep into a season since 2015. Like, you have the affordability to rest him for a bit here for a couple of weeks. The offense is getting retooled. Michael Conforto, Jeff McNeil will both be back within the next week. They're both on rehab assignments right now, which will mean you'll only really be missing Brandon Nimmo after that whole big stretch of injuries. Marcus Stroman, Taijuan Walker are both pitching well. David Peterson had a turnaround game. The bullpen has been surprisingly good this year. Like, the Mets don't have many holes right now. So giving DeGrom a little bit of a break, I think, would pay off. And I know Jacob DeGrom isn't one who really likes to cave into missing starts. Every time he's hurt, and every time this happens, and it's every season, usually early in the season, he gets some tweaks and aches, and Mets Twitter goes crazy. Everybody's freaking out and saying they're going to donate their arms to Jacob DeGrom. But, like,
he doesn't want anyone's arm. It's not going to help him out.
But whenever that happens, do you know who the calmest person is? Jacob DeGrom. And then he has this post-game presser, and he's like, oh, you know, it's just a little something. I expect I'm going to be making my next start. Well, maybe this time you actually give him a little bit of a break. Give him a rest. He's doing so much for this team. He's pitching really well, even when he was hurt. And he said he was dealing with discomfort all 3 innings. He still struck out 8 of the 9 batters he faced. Give him a break. The Mets are in a comfortable position right now, 10 games above 500, 5 games up in the East. Let him rest it up, let everything heal, then come back, and he can be the dominant pitcher he wants to be. But, Tim, I want to turn a little bit to the Yankees because, of course, they're in a packed battle in the American League East with 4 teams that have shown a lot of success. Of course, Boston, seems like all they needed was Alex Cora back, and they're back under control. Tampa Bay playing well, but, of course, they've just lost Tyler Glasnow. And the Blue Jays, Vladimir Guerrero Jr., potential MVP candidate. The Yankees hanging afloat a couple games above 500. Struggled a bit last night at points against Ross Stripling, but how do you assess them at this point in the season?
How do I assess them? Do you want me to be honest? How do I assess the New York Yankees?
Hopefully,
I have more faith in the New York Mets winning the World Series this year, Eddie. It's that simple. I mean, let's put it like this. This team is one of the most unwatchable above 500 baseball teams I've seen in my lifetime. And I'm not saying that because I'm a New York Yankees fan. This team sucks. It's that simple. This team is not good. I'll tell you what, the Yankees got bailed out yesterday. They should have lost to the Toronto Blue Jays in the 9th inning. Had that team also, might I add, not been inconsistent and has not been playing to the level they've been supposed to of the Toronto Blue Jays, they should have won that game. They really should have. Runners on second and third, no outs, down by 1. There's no reason the Blue Jays should have lost yesterday, and they did. And granted, I understand it's Aroldis Chapman, but you cannot blow a situation like that. But here's the thing about the New York Yankees this year, and by the way, folks that watch that may be Yankees fans, I would very much advise for you to tune in tonight to the pregame show with John Sterling, Susan Waldman, to go listen to the wonderful interview that Susan has with Brian Cashman, part 2 tonight before the game, and then you'll have all your answers the way I'm speaking like this here today. I am not bought into this team apologize for that. I'm not bought into this team whatsoever. Let me tell you something. Brian Cashman, I have something for you for one reason. When you tell Susan yesterday that this team is good, but you can't put your thumb to it, to the reason why this team is acting different on the base paths from last year. You can't put your thumb to it in regards to one person or a couple of people that can make this team better. And the fact of the matter is that it's not just one person that's going to change this team. And the fact that you say the bed has already been made and there's not much you can do other than try to maintain it tells me that you're not confident with your baseball team. It tells me this team is in trouble. Think about it. Luis Severino, he's had his setbacks. By the way, you mentioned, for example, Noah Syndergaard. Who the heck is Luis Severino? Haven't seen him in years. Don't even know who he is at this point anymore. The Yankees let Masahiro Tanaka go back home. And he's a lot better. And no offense, I understand Corey Kluber gave us our first no-hitter since 99, but he was a lot better than Corey Kluber is. He's a lot better than Jameson Taillon. The bullpen is great one day, and then it falls apart the next day. And don't even get me started about the Yankees offense. Granted, DJ LeMahieu was due for a bad year. I'm not mad at DJ. That's fine. You can bat 260. That's still average. Giancarlo Stanton, given the average, given the stats he needs, believe it or not, but fans will cry about it. Aaron Judge, you're always hurt, but you got to play. I mean, Gio Urshela, great 1 week, stinks 2 weeks. Aaron Hicks should just be traded. He's always hurt. The outfield, Brett Gardner, needs to retire. That's simply put. Do I have to go on? Clint Frazier, you're not the answer? So, but don't even get me started. Granted, Gary Sanchez is playing better. But Kyle Higashioka is not the answer either. There's no depth. There's no help. The Yankees are in trouble. Trading for Trevor Story is not the answer either. This isn't going to be a World Series move for this team. This team is fourth in the AL East for a reason. Or I'm sorry, third now technically because they passed the Blue Jays. But fourth going into the week for a reason. The team isn't good. And then again, when we were talking about the preseason, Eddie, and I think Zoe was there as well, I said don't count out Boston because this team has been so quiet this offseason. They've made such good, quiet moves to better this team since trading away Mookie Betts that this team may not win a division, but they're going to be there in the playoffs or find a way to sneak their way into a wild card. And what are they doing right now? The second best team in the American League. They're trying to, compete there. Tampa Bay, we knew that pitching, no matter losing Blake Snell, was going to be good. And granted, again, they have key role players stepping up. The Yankees, they lack leadership. They lack consistency. And again, time and time again, it's either a long ball, go home. You have bases loaded, no outs, and you can barely produce a run. This team is inconsistent. Simply put, there is no hope for the New York Yankees. And it stinks saying that as a New York Yankees fan. But there needs to be a lot of answers. There needs to be trades. And I'm sorry, I said it 2-3 years ago. Aaron Boone, I love you, but you're not the answer. You're not a good coach. You make the same mistake time in, time out. You keep pitchers in too long, and then you let them falter, and you wonder why. And Brian Cashman, granted, you gave us so many winning seasons, but your method isn't working. You're whatever you're trying to decide and everything's okay and you're not trading for anyone. We just traded away Mike Tauchman a few months back for a guy that hasn't played baseball in 2 years. And Wandy Rodriguez, or I think that's Wandy Peralta, who's a sub-5 career ERA guy. That's going to help our team. The Yankees aren't making good decisions. They haven't. They haven't for a while. They got lucky on a few. And when's the last time the Yankees actually grew homegrown talent on this roster that's actually been relevant? So, needless to say, Eddie, in conclusion, rant over. The Yankees are in trouble. They're not good. And if they go above 500, that's great. My expectations at this point are 2013, 2014 Yankees, back when they had Steven Drew. Irrelevant as can be, but hey, at least we had above 500 season.
Tim, you sound like a Mets fan.
I want to see a World Series back in New York, but I don't think it's going to be the Mets. Listen, the Mets, granted, I know Francisco Lindor to this point hasn't worked out exactly the plan in regards to how his stats have gone. But you can't say he hasn't been an impact player when the Mets have needed him to this point, especially defensively. The Mets have depth answers. And I know, again, I'm sounding like a Mets fan right now. But the Mets, time in, time out, have proven this year why they're a good baseball team. Because if one side of the ball falls apart, whether if it's offense or defense, the other side picks up. It's not like that for the Yankees. If they get out-hit, they're out-hit the rest of the game. And if the Yankees' offense is great, their pitching falls apart. There's no two sides to the baseball. And granted, I know it's a long season. We're only in June. But this is the worst above 500 baseball team I've ever seen. You can't have it both ways. By the way, and here's another thing, too, and this is my last point. When's the last time the Yankees had a negative run differential? Seriously. When's the last time the New York Yankees have had a negative run differential? To this point, with the exception, again, the last 2 days, I think they got it back to positive by like 1 or 2 runs. But the Yankees had a -7 run differential going into this week. That's never happened, maybe since the 90s. So this team, again, simply just not good. And no matter what they do, no matter what they try to make this team better, no matter what you do, it's not going to be the answer. You're stuck with what you have this year. If this team makes the playoffs, good. But this team's not winning a World Series. They're just not good enough.
I was going to try to add to this, but I feel like Tim kind of went through basically every single problem the Yankees have. But I do have one thing I can also say that I think Tim has said before, but it's worth mentioning again. With the Yankees, they're supposedly the team with the big budget right there with the Dodgers and the Cubs and the Red Sox. How many big blockbuster moves have the Yankees actually made over the last 10 years? Other than bringing in Garrett Cole, they have done nothing. They've tried to bring in homegrown talent, which hasn't really panned out the way we thought. They're still great players. They're still great everyday players, but they're not superstars. Aaron Judge cannot stay healthy. It's Garrett Cole and Giancarlo Stanton are really the only two big moves they've made in the last 10 years. And the Mets, on the other hand, with Steve Cohen, credit to him. I know Lindor and James McCann have been streaky, but they made some moves. They made some below-the-radar moves that have panned out because they saw potential in players. Jonathan VR has completely stolen third base away from J.D. Davis whenever he comes back from one of his phantom Jed Lowry joint injuries. And then, you've got Taijuan Walker, who apparently the Mets were the only team that offered him a contract, and he's got a 2.1 ERA and just had his career high in strikeouts on Monday against the Cubs. I mean, this is a really good time for the Mets. It's a big difference right now between the Mets and the Yankees. But I want to shift gears to one more thing, going to the NFL now. Aaron Rodgers, of course, did not show up to OTAs. The Packers can fine him. We don't know what they're actually going to do with that. But I think it's pretty safe to say Aaron Rodgers is done playing in Green Bay. But there's a lot of questions. Will he play elsewhere? Is this the end of his career? And I have a perfect home for him that I think would be really fun if he went to the New England Patriots. I just think if he went there, if he went to the Patriots, could you imagine with Bill Belichick? They made so many great moves this offseason to bolster the receiving corps, to bolster their defense, both of whom were very leaky last year. They are really a quarterback away. Cam Newton is not leading them to anything better than 8-8. Mac Jones could be a good quarterback in the future, but his draft stock plummeted. He fell to the Patriots, and he's not going to be a star in his rookie year, and Jarrett Stidham is a complete bust. If you bring in Aaron Rodgers to that team, we know the Jets brought in Zach Wilson in the draft. I don't know how good they're going to be right away. The Dolphins are a solid team, but Tua, I still don't have that much faith in him. We know Buffalo's a really good team as well. But New England could compete with the Bills with Aaron Rodgers. And could you imagine a Super Bowl with Tom Brady and the Bucs going for back-to-back, Brady going for 8 against Bill Belichick and Aaron Rodgers in New England? That would be the story of the decade in the NFL.
As much as I hate to see him go to the Patriots, if he gets out of Green Bay, I will be so happy. It just makes me so mad that he has to leave Green Bay when the Lions have just started their rebuilding phase. Because there have been so many years where if he had left in the past couple years, it would have been so good, but he had to choose this year to leave. But my thing with Aaron Rodgers is that I get that he's having issues with the Packers organization, right? But you have to remember, he's grown up with these guys. He's played with these guys. I mean, they just re-signed Aaron Jones. They have all these guys that they just re-signed for Aaron, right? And that's the thing that I see the Packers trying to do most is they're trying to see and test Aaron Rodgers' love for his guys because they're bringing the guys back. They're holding extra mandatory workouts. They're showing Aaron Rodgers that, look, we re-signed your guys. We paid them. They're here for you. If you want to be here, you have all the tools. So for Aaron Rodgers, I don't think it's the end of his career. I think there's zero chance because, first of all, he can deny as much as he wants, but he loves the spotlight. He loves the spotlight. He loves getting the rings. He loves everything about that. And he loves football too. And maybe he does want to get out of the NFC North, and I wouldn't blame him for that. But the Packers are a team where they're always an NFC championship team, right? Their hump's always been going to the Super Bowl. But you bring in a couple players, you get better. The Packers want to sign people for Aaron, and I feel like he deserves to give them one more chance. Because they signed all these guys. They could have let Aaron Jones walk. They paid him so much money. They paid all these guys so much freaking money. And I feel like it's now or never for the Packers. And because they're the Packers, they'll be good again. Like, it doesn't matter who they have at QB. They'll be good anyway. But Aaron Rodgers is going to be their QB1. He can be angry that they drafted Jordan Love, and he can go off and be angry about all this stuff. But he is their QB1. How do you bench Aaron Rodgers? You don't. He could not show up till the first game of the season and he'd still play because he's Aaron Rodgers and because they're the Packers. It's just the way it goes. So for me, I think it comes down to, can his guys get him to play? I think it's less the organization because he doesn't want to play for the organization. In his head, if the organization asks, it's a no. So I think his guys have to go and ask him and say, we want you here and we're going to support you against the organization. And for me, that's what's the deciding factor. But it would be terrifying to see him in New England. I agree.
But I feel like he's already won back the guys. We've seen, those pictures with him in his fancy little hat at the Kentucky Derby with the whole offensive line. And Davante Adams, of course, likes him. But I've got to disagree with you on one thing. The Packers without Aaron Rodgers, think about all the times where they've had injuries in the past. And when Rodgers is out, the Packers are a terrible team. Think about, and they've had so many different backup quarterbacks throughout the history of this team. And looking at next year, at this point in the season, if Rodgers is gone, Jordan Love is probably your quarterback, and he's never played in the NFL before. I still think he was a risk to begin with. I mean, he had thrown 17 picks in his career at a lower FBS school. I mean, he was not really – he's definitely not worth a first-round draft pick, and I don't really know about his potential. And I was watching something, I think it was on Fox Sports 1, where they were discussing his first round of practices as the QB1 technically on the depth chart. He went 6 for 19 and threw 3 interceptions. And that's in practice. I mean, I don't know. And you talk about Aaron Jones is a great running back. Davante Adams, I love him. He's a great receiver. He's been my top fantasy player for the last 3 years on my fantasy football team. But these guys become better because of Aaron Rodgers. And the Packers, if they do not have Aaron Rodgers, I don't see them going very far at all.
Yeah, well, you know what? Is, and Eddie, the way I look at it is this, is that Aaron's just simply done. Aaron is a guy, when he says something, he typically means it. And I understand Zoe's point, for example, about the fact that, they're trying to bring in guys, but are they really? Again, you didn't draft a wide receiver in the first round this year. That was the least they could have done. Granted, yes, they needed a defensive back, but if you really want to make Aaron Rodgers happy, all he's been asking for 3 to 4 seasons was, I want another target outside of Davante Adams. Granted, some guys like Marquez Valdez-Scantling are really good, but they're very similar style receivers to Davante Adams. Valdez-Scantling's a route runner just like Davante Adams is. He doesn't really have as much of a deep threat. Davante has to serve that role. Sure, I guess you could say Allen Lazard could be that guy, but again, he's also not that good of a receiver to what people think. He's just that third slot, kind of like a Sterling Shepard. I mean, think about it too. They brought in Jimmy Graham a little back a while ago. Obviously, they don't have him anymore. Robert Tonyan has proven to be very, very solid. That's great. But when your number 2 wide receiver option technically is, your halfback, that's not good. That's not good at all. And I think about it like this. Green Bay, you've had your opportunities. I mean, you can't come so close so many times and not get to the Super Bowl. There's an aspect of progression in the NFL. And the fact of the matter is that if you've come close that many times, you're eventually going to regress. You can't keep the same team and continue to be successful. I don't think it's a fact of the matter. I think Aaron Rodgers' guys love him. He's had respect for that entire team, that entire organization, since he's been there for day one. But recently, they haven't treated him well. I'm sorry. And again, I get getting your next quarterback, but at the same time, Jordan Love in the first round was not worth it, considering where you were the year before. And I think this team, if they wanted a sense of progression, you could have probably drafted a quarterback second or third round. I understand your backup quarterbacks haven't been good, but Eddie, you've proven the statistics too. That's Tim Tebow-like statistics. Literally Tim Tebow-like statistics in terms of practice. I understand rookies go through their struggles and so on. But I make this point, and again, I know we haven't seen Love play yet, but good quarterbacks and good players that come out and play football in the NFL, if you're something special, sure, you may not win games, but you show something special. So if Love is their opening day starter, and in this 17-game season, he better be something special, or Green Bay is going to be in a lot of trouble. We've seen players question, well, if Aaron Rodgers leaves, I'm questioning my future here in Green Bay, specifically Devontae Adams, and other players will follow suit. And the fact of the matter is this, Aaron Rodgers is not coming back to Green Bay. I'm interested in, Eddie, you bring up a good point about New England. That would be very, very interesting to see him in New England, because obviously there's already the GOAT debate in terms of him and Brady, which of course Brady's the GOAT. Let's not deny that. But in terms of the greatest pure passer of all time, Aaron Rodgers is by far in terms of protecting the football and being a pure scorer. Because you think about a touchdown interception ratio like that, there's no one like him, no one even close like Aaron Rodgers. And to see that as a potential Super Bowl would be incredible. But I also just don't think that's a legitimate of a landing spot. I think that, again, I mean, I'm not saying this as a Giants fan, but I'd love to see him replace Daniel Jones. But I could see him replacing a team that relatively just needs a simple quarterback that's right on the brink. And Zoe, I won't even rule this out. What if the Detroit Lions trade for him? You never know.
There's too much bad blood here.
Think about it. Seriously, they have the draft picks.
You know how much money he'd want? You know how much money they want. They owe so much money right now to Jared Goff for the next 2 years. There's no way that they could have any money to sign Aaron Rodgers. If you look at the amount of people they've cut, look, I would not be mad. I'd be like, sure, but Aaron Rodgers needs to win in the next couple of years. The Lions are not winning in the next couple of years. I can promise you that. And they've dropped so many guys because of that salary cap. I mean, we've seen them get rid of Gerard Davis, who was one of my favorites. Like, we've seen them drop guy after guy. I mean, their whole receiving core is just gone. They have no one left. Lions are depleted. Literally, I have 8 Lions jerseys, and none of them are on the team anymore after this year. Like, I need to go shopping. I have no idea what to do anymore because they're dropping everyone. And as much as I'd love to see them get him, just because despite the Packers mostly would be my favorite thing, so I can yell at Cheesehead and love my life. But other than that, I feel like they just don't have the money. But yeah.
Well, there could be that. And then here's another team too. And again, Eddie, I said going into the draft, I made a very strong point about a team that I see could be drafting a quarterback, and then we forget about the New Orleans Saints. We really can't. And again, I understand they have Jameis Winston, but Taysom Hill is not the answer. He's not going to be your everyday quarterback. If the Saints don't jump at Aaron Rodgers, I don't know what they're doing at this point. Aaron Rodgers is basically Sean Payton's dream outside of Drew Brees. He matches the same exact persona. You have a guy that can throw the football 50 times a game if he wants to, and you know he's not going to turn it over. You know he could throw for 5,000 yards in a season if you really wanted him to, and he'll have the targets. He'll have Michael Thomas. He'll have other depth guys. It's not like this team lacks targets.
Not to mention, Kamara's a lot like Jones, too. Yeah, not to mention Kamara's a lot like Jones. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So I can really see him going to New Orleans. But the fact of the matter is this. Aaron Rodgers is not coming back. It's not going to happen. And I would not be surprised if we see a Le'Veon Bell situation where he will literally sit out the entire year if it means getting his point across. And by the way, we saw what that wonder did, for example, for Peyton Manning. Granted, I know Peyton was hurt, but we saw what Peyton Manning did after missing a year. I don't want to think about what Aaron Rodgers looks like after missing a year. He has a lot of years left. The man is healthy as can be, granted his injury history. Aaron Rodgers is a good quarterback. He has 5 more years in him, minimal. So I'm excited to see what happens for Aaron. No matter what team gets him, I can promise you that team instantly is going to become a winning football team.
I also thought, well, I don't think it's going to happen now, but I also thought one of the Southern California teams would have been a perfect fit for him, especially if he wanted to go and be Mr. Jeopardy. That would be very convenient. But of course, and those teams have the perfect set for him to be successful. You're in a fun division in both the AFC West and the NFC West. You can kind of try to duel with some of these other quarterbacks who are ranked up there in the hierarchy with you, battling Russell Wilson in the NFC West or battling Mahomes in the AFC West and setting up a real showdown there. And those teams had great defenses. They had weapons. They were willing to get weapons for him, unlike, the Packers over the last 15 years. But the issues there, the Rams, of course, are pretty set with Matthew Stafford at this point. The Chargers, Justin Herbert, really exceeded all expectations ever since the Rose Bowl, where people really didn't know him very well. He's just completely dominated and was probably, I'd argue, the best quarterback last season over Burrow and Tua of the rookie quarterbacks that made an impact in the NFL. And then the Raiders, of course, they're kind of set with Derek Carr. And if Aaron Rodgers doesn't want to deal with all the chaos that comes with being in the Green Bay Packers organization, he certainly wouldn't want to have to deal with John Gruden for an entire year. But
you know what? I was about to say that would be a landing spot. Not what if you're with me. I mean, think about it. Carr, for years, we said, oh, well, Gruden's trade away everyone else. You might as well trade away Carr. You never know. Seriously, think about it. That's a team, too, developing a lot of young targets. And, I mean, another guy like Darren Waller, who is really Gruden has rejuvenated his career. I mean, that's still not a bad option for Aaron if things were to work out. Granted, Gruden's attitude and so on. But again, that's a team, too, that could be on the brink.
Well, it could be really fun to see what happens with Aaron Rodgers. Of course, we're only a little more than a month away from training camp. But Zoe Alter, thanks so much for joining us once again today here on Sports Speak.
Thank you for having me. And as football season gets closer, I promise I will destroy you guys in your opinions any day.
All right, let's see what happens this year when we talk about Tampa Bay. But that'll just about do it. We hope you enjoyed today's show. Like I said, we're going to have more this summer, trying to do 2 shows a week once again like we did last summer. But until next time, I'm Eddie Kalegi.
And I'm Tim Moore.
Signing off here on Sports Speak. We hope you have a great rest of your day.